The 1947 blacklist was completely the work of the producers. That is, they decided that these 10 men who had refused to cooperate with the Committee on Un-American Activities had given the motion picture industry a bad name, and they thought the only way to deal with it was to fire them or refuse to hire them, as the case may be, until they became cooperative witnesses. So the blacklist begins in November 1947 with 10 names on it.
Probably while I was in college, and what probably got me engaged politically was the Spanish War. It was also during the Depression, and what was happening then started me thinking politically about the causes and what was going on. I didn't join the Communist Party till after the war, really. I was in from, I would say, like 46 to 56.
The House Committee began most of its major investigations in 1946, so they were active 4 years before McCarthy comes on the scene, and they were widespread in their investigations. I mean, they looked every which way. McCarthy, in 1950, when he starts, he's a senator, and he's mostly focused on communists in the government. He starts out with the State Department, then he moves to the Department of Defense. The Hollywood Blacklist and McCarthy are utterly separate entities. In fact, calling the McCarthy period is really a historical misnomer. Martin Berkeley had been one of the original founders of the Communist Party in Hollywood, who had himself been named, and he wrote a letter to the committee saying, no, that was a lie. And then a few weeks later, he had second thoughts and said, okay, I was, and I'm going to come and testify. And he was the most infamous informer. He named over 150 people, and one of them was Carl Foreman, who probably had not been on the committee's radar before then, because Foreman had only been in the party for about a year. Well, the FBI had gotten hold of a list of the communists in Hollywood, but that was in 1941 or 42, so Foreman's name wouldn't have been on that. So my guess is, had he not been named by Berkeley, he might not have been called. He worked for Stanley Kramer, and he was a vice president in one of Stanley Kramer's production companies, and he had written several films before that, The Champion being one of them. So Foreman had already begun writing High Noon before he was subpoenaed. The movie was already in production. Now Foreman, when he got a subpoena, wasn't sure what he was going to do. He was pretty sure he wasn't going to give names, but he didn't know exactly how he was going to do that.
I was writing a play for Elia Kazan at the time when he testified and gave names. And Ben Maddow, my friend, after being blacklisted for a while, also testified as a friendly witness. And that was tough. He told me, he said he named me, because I said, how could you name people because I knew who were friends of his. And he said, well, they're not friends anymore, and I don't see them. And anyway, one of the familiar excuses always was, well, they've been named already. I didn't hurt them.
Some witnesses before Foreman had come up with what they called the diminished fifth approach, which is, I will tell you everything about myself, but that's it. I won't give any names. I will take the Fifth Amendment. But the committee didn't accept that. And so to do that left you open to be found in contempt of Congress. So Foreman made the offer to the committee. The committee didn't accept it, so all he did was he gave his basic history. He said he had signed an affidavit that he had not been a member of the Communist Party as of 1947, and he wouldn't answer any other questions. The big problem between Kramer and Foreman was Kramer claims that Foreman wasn't honest with him about his membership in the party and how he was going to testify. Foreman claims he had been, and that Kramer just became scared and decided to fire him quickly. He was part of two Kramer production companies. He was fired from both. But because he was an officer, and because he had not signed a deferral agreement, which was necessary in order for them to get a completion bond on the film, he had leverage that very few other people had. So as a result, he was able to get a very large severance fee for giving up, for giving up his rights, except he wouldn't give up his rights to the screen credit, to the writing credit, but he agreed to give up associate producer credit, and he was paid, I think, about $150,000. Well, remember, this comes from a short story, and this was all in the short story. And the short story was written several years earlier. So Carl Foreman saw parallels in it clearly. I mean, he was clearly writing it and adapting it in a way that highlighted the parallels that he saw. Fred Zinnemann, the director, claims it wasn't a political movie. It was just a dramatic, kind of mise en scène. And Stanley Kramer claims it wasn't political, but it was obviously, at least as it came from the pen of Carl Foreman, a very political film, and meant to show how panic takes over and good people start to do very bad things. Well, Gary Cooper was a very far right. I mean, he was a hardcore conservative, and he had been one of the friendly witnesses in 1947. But he worked very well with Carl Foreman. I mean, they didn't have any issues. And in fact, when the movie was over and Foreman was blacklisted, Cooper at first offered to help Foreman in any way he could, but the pressure became too great, and he had to back off from doing that. But he wasn't he was anti-communist politically, but personally, he at least in the people who were on High Noon, he wasn't. He wasn't antagonistic toward Foreman. Well, Foreman just thought Kramer had betrayed him. He thought that if Kramer stood behind him, they could have broken the blacklist or stopped it, and that no one else had to be fired. And he was wrong about that. The blacklist was far too big for any independent producer like Stanley Kramer to do anything about it. What would have happened is probably Kramer would have lost his contract with Columbia and would have had and all the people in his company would have been, and that was his concern, all the people in his company would be out of work. So I think Foreman was wrong about that. Could Kramer have been stronger and behind Foreman? Perhaps, but not a lot, without risking the same problem.
I think if one producer had stood up and done it, certainly in the early days of the blacklist, that he would have been hammered. The American Legion would have come after him, the government would have come after him, the committee would have come after him. Nobody wanted to do. His pictures would have been blacklisted and picketed. So I don't think any one producer. You never know. I mean, nobody did it. So, although at the beginning of the blacklist, the producers were very much against the blacklist. David Susskind, who was a prominent producer at the time, hired blacklisted people, but he wasn't going to hire them under their own name. He gave them jobs, and I was very grateful to David. No, the only thought I would have about the blacklist is that we're a country, whenever there's some kind of threat, implied or external or whatever, we immediately start getting rid of our civil liberties. In my time, the enemy was communism. Now it's terrorism or something. And we have a surveillance state and a national security state. And unfortunately, we're part of a continuum in this country, political continuum that we're in now, I believe.